And that idea that everybody wants to know is, how do you get your dog to obey commands and pay attention to you no matter what's going on around them? Well, in this video, that's exactly what I want to cover. Hey guys, how's it going? Hope everyone's having a great start to their 2024 so far. In this video, I want to go over a concept or a topic that I know many people want to know. And it seems like it's hard to get a straight answer on this subject. And the reason for that is because it's not just one straightforward answer. There's actually a handful of different mini concepts or moving parts that come together to create this idea. And that idea that everybody wants to know is, how do you get your dog to obey commands and pay attention to you no matter what's going on around them? How do you get a dog to do that? Well, in this video, that's exactly what I want to cover. I want to talk about that in a more holistic way. I want to talk about all those little components that come together to create the whole for you guys, so that you can at least understand what goes into it. And maybe you'll see some of these parts come together, because all of these things I'm about to talk to you about, I'm pretty sure I've mentioned in this channel at least somewhere in some video. But unless you deal with dogs every day, I could see how it would be difficult to see how these come together to create that picture. Let's just go ahead and get into it. So the first component to this topic that I want to go over is something that I'm going to call interaction control. And interaction control is exactly what it sounds like. It's controlling your dog's interactions with their environment and everything in it. And this component is so important that I feel like that if you don't do this, and your goal is to get your dog to pay attention to you no matter what and obey commands no matter what, then you might as well not even start training. I liken this to nutrition in a fitness program of some sort. You know, whether you're trying to build muscle or burn fat, if your nutrition is not in place, it does not matter how good your training is. You will never out-train your terrible diet, and you'll always stay the way that you are. Well, in the same way, interaction control is that for getting a dog to pay attention to you no matter what. And here's why. Something I want you to understand, or what I want you to realize, is that your dog is learning all the time. All the time. Not just when you're training with them, not when you're just interacting with them, but every interaction that they have in their life, every interaction with other people, other dogs, anything and everything in their environment is teaching them something. And if you don't take steps to control those interactions, what will happen is the dog will do what nature has told him to do from genetics, from instinct, and that is to gravitate towards pleasures and avoid discomfort and pain. Now, if you bring a new dog into your house, whether it's a puppy or an adult dog, it really doesn't matter, and that dog doesn't know any better yet because you haven't taught him anything, or you can't control the dog through the training because the training isn't established, or your relationship with him isn't established, whatever, and you just let your dog do whatever they want with no supervision, no interaction control, then your dog is going to develop habits all on their own. They're going to develop those habits through naturally occurring operant conditioning. And more often than not, those behaviors they develop turn into habits that quickly become a pain in your ass. A very easy classic example of this is dumpster diving, or getting in the trash can, right? Your dog sniffs out, I don't know, turkey leg or something in your trash can, right? It's a dog. Dogs are known for their sense of smell. It's not gonna be hard for him to sniff out a turkey leg. Finds the trash can, he gets in it, and pulls out that turkey leg, and he got reinforced for it, right? And that was naturally occurring. Now, maybe the sight of the trash can, or maybe the smell of turkey leg, something can trigger him to go into the trash can expecting a reward, because the last time he did that, there was a freaking turkey leg in there, right? And that's just like a jackpot. That all happened because you didn't control that interaction. You allowed that to happen. And now your dog is going to be a bit of a dumpster diver, right? And if that goes on too long, or they get too many reps of that, and it generally doesn't take very many reps for them to figure out that it's worth their while to do that, Now you have a dog that's, all for dumpster diving, and you've created a problem accidentally just from not managing your dog. And now getting your dog to not dumpster dive is something that you're going to have to work through. Whereas if you just took the time to manage your dog, supervise your dog, control their interactions with their environment, interaction control, then that would have never happened in the first place, and that issue would have never arose. Another not so obvious example of this, but one that happens all the time, is let's say your dog is a little bit on the anxious side and they're loose in the house. You have the front door open, but maybe the screen door is closed, and the UPS man pulls up and he's going to come to your front door to drop a package off. Well, your dog's a little bit on the anxious side. All your dog knows is that somebody's coming to the door, and now they're uncomfortable. So they start barking. They start freaking out. The UPS man comes to the door, drops the package off, takes his little picture or whatever, and then walks away. We know that the UPS man does that. That's their job. That's what they do. But to your dog that was freaking out the whole time, they think that their barking and their freaking out made the threat, the UPS man, go away. That is a form of negative reinforcement. And for those of you who don't know, negative reinforcement is the removal of something aversive to create a behavior. The aversive experience, or from the dog's perspective, is the UPS man, the stranger, approaching your front door. That's made them uncomfortable. They felt anxious about it. That's aversive to them. If it wasn't aversive, they probably wouldn't have freaked out as hard. So they're freaking out, they're barking, the guy goes away. That's the relief of the anxiety. The anxiety goes away after he walks away, and then your dog's thinking, what was I doing? What did I do to make that happen? Well, I was barking and freaking out. It doesn't take very many reps of that for your dog to figure out that freaking out gets people to go away. And now you have a dog that might be reactive to strangers, right? And that all happened, or it could potentially happen, from just not managing your dog's interactions. Another big part of interaction control is that if you don't have that in place and you're doing training on top of it, if your dog is getting more practice interacting with other things than they are interacting with you and paying attention to you, then guess what? The dog is going to pay attention to other things in the environment. You have to stack the deck in your favor to the point where basically the only interaction your dog gets is from you. Their play, their food, their stimulation, everything comes from you. And you do this for weeks, maybe even months, until the dog sees you as the shit, basically. And then from there, you branch out into the real world. And when you do that, when you take the time to do that up front, and then you start branching out into the real world, it's going to be much easier for them to pay attention to you instead of the environment. And one more thing to keep in mind about interaction control is that if your dog is practicing unwanted behavior while at the same time you're trying to teach them good behavior, well, if their practice of unwanted behavior outweighs the practice they're getting with you doing the wanted behavior, then you're never going to get anywhere. Even if it's 50-50, you're probably not going to get anywhere. And if it's 60-40 in your favor, then you may make some progress, but it's going to be very slow progress. Whereas if you just make it's 100% the behavior I want and 0% the behavior I don't want, then the dog can only get better. And if it's the opposite of that, where the dog is practicing the unwanted behavior and not practicing the wanted behavior, then they're always going to keep continuing to do that unwanted behavior. It's just simple statistics, really. That's all it is. So interaction control is what allows you to stack the deck in your favor and make sure that you are completely aware of your dog's day-to-day interactions and you are in complete control of them. As the dog gets better, as the dog's training evolves and you can control them, then you can start loosening the reins a bit. You can start allowing them to get more interactions with things, still probably supervised. I mean, I really wouldn't recommend allowing your dog to do anything unsupervised for their entire life for the most part, because you never know what kind of bad habits they can develop. That's just my personal take on it. Everybody's got their own opinion on it. But for me, I want my dog to see me as the source of all things good. I want to be the center of their world. And if that's what you want too, then you have to show them that you are the center of their world through action. You have to show them that. And interaction control is one of the best ways you can do that. The second concept that fits into all this is feeding through training. And feeding through training, just like the previous concept, is exactly what it sounds like. Your dog is going to eat by interacting with you, or you are going to feed them through training. Now, of course, that training can take many different forms. It doesn't really matter what you're doing for training, but the idea is that the dog has to go through you in order to acquire the food they need to survive. And that's really the key point there, is that interacting with you is no longer a want. At this point, feeding through training will turn it into a need, because you're now tapping into that survival mechanism in their mind. Now, this does a handful of positive things, but one of the bigger ones, as it pertains to training specifically, is that the dog's food drive will increase exponentially. It'll be through the roof. And this will play a big role whenever you start going out into real world scenarios, because now the dog has to make a decision to interact with some distraction or get the food they need from you by paying attention to you. And because that distraction is probably more of a want and the food they need is more of a need now, they're going to be much more likely to choose you instead of the distraction, which will make teaching your dog skills and teaching your dog to pay attention to you in real world environments much, much easier. Not only that, but whenever you do reinforce your dog with the food, it's going to be even more reinforcing to them. And having a high value reinforcement plays a huge role in teaching a dog behaviors through positive reinforcement. I know this may sound obvious, what I'm about to say, but you'd be surprised at how many people miss this point or don't really look into it with their training with their dog. But in order for behavior to be logged as a positive experience, if we're talking about positive reinforcement, then what you're offering them has to actually be reinforcing to the dog. And just because they take something from you, they are willing to accept whatever it is you offered them, does not mean necessarily that it was reinforcing to them. For example, a lot of dogs are kind of meh on dry milk bones. Sure, they'll take them, but it's not necessarily reinforcing enough for them to log that experience as something that they want to do again. But if you offer them something like pieces of steak, that'd be one way to up the value of the reward. Now that reinforcement is actually reinforcing, and they're going to connect that to the behavior or the skills that you're trying to teach them. And in the same way, through feeding through training, even if you're using kibble, the value of the reward has gone up exponentially, because now this is how they eat. They need this to survive, right? It's not about having extra on top of the food they're already eating. This food's value is irreplaceable and non-negotiable, essentially, and you can't really beat that when it comes to motivation. And finally, the last concept in all this is one that I've drilled into the ground on this channel, and that is engagement training. And essentially, engagement training is another form of interaction control if you really think about it. It's just on top of the interaction control, you are also going to reinforce the dog for choosing to interact with you and not the environment, but in a very systematic and methodical way. I've done several different videos on engagement training, so if you want to know more about that, just pick one and start watching it, and you'll see what that's all about. Now imagine with me for a moment that you have your dog's interactions, their day-to-day interactions, under control. Their day-to-day is under control to the point where you know exactly what interactions they're having moment to moment, and you are in complete control of them, and you are doing everything to make sure that they don't develop bad habits from not being supervised, from you not managing those interactions. So in other words, they're not creating any unwanted behaviors, they're not developing bad habits, and they're not doing anything day to day that's going to go against the training that you plan to do with them. It's a very clean slate that you can build off of, and no uphill battles to fight. Then imagine on top of that, you're doing feeding through training, where the only time the dog gets to eat is when they interact with you. And they start to see you as the source of what they need in order to survive. Not only will that really boost up the relationship you have with the dog, but it'll create extremely positive associations to you, and the dog will be willing to be much, much more attentive to you, even when there could be some very distractions going on around them. And then from there, you finally layer on the engagement training. where you're teaching the dog through those really high value positive reinforcement reps through the feeding through training, that it is much worth their while to pay attention to you and not the environment, and you drill it over and over and over and over again. With that 3-step combo, essentially the dog has no choice but to start to see you as the source of everything they could ever want and need in their life. And we haven't even layered on play, we haven't layered on toys, tug, fetch, we haven't layered on any of that super fun stuff that some dogs really get into, and that can send it forward even more. And also, we haven't even touched true obedience training either. This is all just engagement training. But really, you don't need obedience to have a dog that's super attentive to you. You can condition attentiveness just from doing those first 3 steps. I mean, that is essentially the whole idea of engagement training, is to get the dog to give you their complete and undivided attention no matter what's going on around them. Then from that complete and undivided attention, you start teaching them new skills and behaviors that you want to use or that you plan to use, behaviors and skills that would be beneficial to you and your lifestyle and what you want to do with your dog. So from there, if you need a super solid recall, it's going to be a piece of cake to teach a super solid recall. If you need to teach a very solid sit, stay, or down stay, or go to your bed and stay there until I release you, that's going to be really simple and straightforward now, because you have all of that set up ahead of time. If you don't do that ahead of time, then you're going to be fighting battles pretty well the whole time you're teaching obedience training, which is a mistake that I see many people make. So there you go. Those are the main components that come together to create the picture of a dog paying attention to you no matter what's going on around them. Now, I realize I didn't go into much, if any, detail on any of them, but that wasn't the point of this video. The point of this video was to give you guys an encapsulation or an overview of what goes into that, and just to help you understand that it's not just one thing. There isn't just one thing you do and you get complete and total undivided attention from your dog. It's a conglomeration of a handful of different things that come together to create that picture. And there's a lot of things in dog training. Really, all of dog training is like that to a certain extent, where if you are lacking in one area, it's gonna show somehow, some way, at some point, more than likely. So really, dog training is about being aware of all these different things that impact it and being as even as you can on all sides. And I suppose you could think of this one idea, what we just covered, as a little microcosm of that, where it's the same thing. It's a bunch of different parts that come together to create a whole, and you have to be balanced on all of them in order to create the whole. So anyway, I hope this video was at least enlightening, kind of, clear things up for you a little bit. If you have any questions, and if you'd like to see some more detailed videos on interaction control, feeding through training, I can certainly do that. Just let me know in the comments. But until next time, good luck with your training, have fun with it, and I'll see you in the next one.